Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wanted to comment as we embark on this part of the bill that I think it's a failure of not just the Minister but of the Cabinet, and I'm sure the Minister wanted to achieve more. But when I look through the bill in its form as we go through the committee stages, there are 5 failures that I see: on timing, on the scope of the bill, on the budget it carries with it, on the delivery that it brings and the promises that were held for it. And I take the Minister back to a speech he gave 2 years ago this month to the Planning Institute, where he said he wanted to get the EPA operational by the 1st of July 2010. So the bill is a year late. That is on record, Minister, on record that you wanted it up and running in July last year. It's 2011 now, Minister. This was 1st of July 2010, fully operational and expanded. Not a ministry of 5 or 6 staff seconded across from the Ministry for the Environment. That was not a fully operational EPA, as you wanted by the 1st of July 2010, employing 7 staff. The second failure is around the scope, because as my colleague Charles Chauvel has noted in his SOPs, it was certainly envisaged that this would be an agency which had with it a range of functions that are certainly not provided for, and the Minister's given us an indication that he wants to bring in later in the year some additional scope for the bill in respect of our exclusive economic zone. But back in that speech of 2 years ago, he was looking at the issues of ocean management, not mentioned, on the implementation of the Waste Management Act, and other environmental priorities. This is the EPA. These are environmental priorities. They are not mentioned in this bill and therefore are not being given the duty of care that we would have envisaged from the EPA. I note from commentary in the Select Committee News on the 18th of June of 2010 where the Minister was saying that there were going to be 40 staff coming across and associated with administration of the emissions trading scheme. And I know there are about 90 staff coming across from IRMA. So that's 130 staff. And where are the rest of the staff to do these big tasks for the Environment Minister? I need to say, because I understand the staffing levels are estimated at 140 staff. You've also got the fast-track mechanism, so I cannot see that there is any additional resource. It's simply a trade-over, a carry-over of an existing staff put into a new agency. So where is the brave new world that was going to be created from the EPA as you heralded in the blue-green document of 2006, which was going to create this brave new world for the environment? It was going to be allied with a Ministry for Sustainable Development, which never emerged. That absolutely disappeared in the process. And what we've come back to is an EPA, the purpose for which is defined by this bill, is to establish an Environmental Protection Authority and to provide for its functions and operations. Compare and contrast that with the objectives and goals and functions of the EPA in the United States, which was a brave model. I have to say it became a tainted model because President George Bush put people in charge coming out of organisations like Monsanto and the mining industry, who are not exactly going to be regarded as environmental warriors. And I know we're not going down that track with the appointments that will be made to head this authority, or one hopes not. But absolutely the objectives of the EPA in the States were to have clean air and global climate change addressed, to have clean and safe water, to have land preservation and restoration, to have a commitment to healthy communities and ecosystems, to have compliance and environmental stewardship. Where are they in this bill? There is no reference to those kind of objectives, and they should be at the heart of this bill, because this is the agency that should be delivering on those objectives, Minister. And if you do not have them specified there as objectives, how on earth can the officials, the handful of officials who aren't going to be transferred over, who aren't going to be tied up continuing the duties of IRMA under another name, who aren't going to be managing HASNO, who actually might have some capacity, as few as they are, to deliver on all of those brave environmental objectives set out in the blue-green agenda, how are they going to deliver on those if they're not spelled out under the piece of legislation which they are required to operate under? So So it's a greatly disappointing document, to say the least. And we wanted to see a strong EPA. It's absolutely essential to have a strong EPA, but it's got to be resourced, it's got to be given the leadership, it's got to be given the principles and goals and objectives that it will work to. Otherwise, the chances are it will not deliver. It will not deliver for the environment. But, Mr Chair.
Brendan Burns.
It will not deliver for the environment, and the Minister's track record on these matters is concerning for us all. And I note the recent delivery of the Land and Water Forum report, a process I utterly applaud. It absolutely picked up the model that had been developed in Canterbury in respect of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, led by Environment Canterbury before its demise as a democratic organisation. And I absolutely support the Land and Water Forum and the bringing together of all of those parties. But what was the Minister's prognosis for what's going to happen from here on in respect of the recommendation it's going to make? It's going to take, he said, several years to implement the recommendations of the Land and Water Forum. Several years. So what's going to happen in the interim, Minister? What's going to happen in the interim to the waterways of my province of Canterbury when we've got a doubling of the production at the Synlait plant, the milk powder plant, a plant very close to the township of Dunsandel, which has already got E. coli and has had in its water supply for the last 18 months? What's going to happen to the water around the plant that Fonterra's going to build out at Darfield, a 2 million litre a day processing plant? What's going to happen to protect the waterways of my province in its several years of interim? And you've often used the phrase of the long 9 years of the Labor government and its supposed inaction on water, although the policy statement on freshwater landed on your desk as you became Minister. 2.5 years on, nothing's happened with it other than you're referring it, kicking it for touch to the Land and Water Forum, and now you're saying it's going to take several years. So those will be 9 long years, perhaps, of inaction before you actually get into place something. And I'd like to know what the EPA is going to do. What tools has it got? What staffing and resources has it got? What objectives has it got to deliver on environmental outcomes that will improve the water quality of my province and for the rest of New Zealand over the next several years while we wait for you to start implementing the National Freshwater Policy Statement and the recommendations of the Land and Water Forum? It is enormously disappointing to those of us with a real and genuine commitment to environmental policy to see this bill come through, because there were high hopes built for it. And all we're actually really seeing is a continuation, and I think that Colin James, in an article in various newspapers in January, hit the nail on the head. He said the Minister is committed to environmental policy, but the problem is he doesn't have the upper hand in the Cabinet. The economic growth cabal is in charge. They want that fast-track growth. They want to see the roading projects pushed through under urgency. They want to see the new growth in the dairy industry without the environmental checks and balances. And in the interim, the environment's going to have to pay the price. And that's an appalling outcome and consequence, and it puts at risk our very basis as a nation, because we trade every day in the international marketplace on the premise that we are clean and green, that we are a nation with an absolute commitment to environmental outcomes, and we trade on that reputation daily, and we trample on that reputation daily. And this bill, very disappointingly, is not going to provide any halt and any sense of balance to that growth record. It is absolutely a disappointment to us that we are not seeing any real commitment of funding, any real commitment of policy, any real commitment of objectives which would actually see some reversal of some of the environmental declines that we have suffered as a nation. And we all want to see the outcomes of sustainable growth. We all want to see our farmers able to access water as long as they do so as responsible environmental stewards. We want to see that. This bill could have been the mechanism which began the process of turning back the clock on old-time practices, using the environment as simply as a tool for production, not regarding it as our greatest treasure and taonga, and really beginning a process which said to New Zealanders, we are going to uphold our environmental values. They are truly important to all our futures, and the people who will suffer the most through this bill not starting to deliver on that are the farming community. because they are the ones who will, in the first analysis, be penalised by international markets as they begin to see that our environmental track record has not improved and is not going to improve for several years. This is the bill we had hoped would see the turnaround of that. It is enormously disappointing to see it come through in a way which simply allows the continuation of the pro-growth strategies without the environmental consequences being taken into account. I think that Bill English has won the debate within the Cabinet. There should have been real resource for this bill and this agency. It should have absolutely delivered for the environment.
Cam Cool.